The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm orange glow over the small town of Meadow Ridge as the workday drew to a close. In the middle of town sat the Sterling Motors car dealership, a modest yet bustling business that had served the community for years. Salesmen in crisp suits hustled about, eagerly waiting for customers to drive off in shiny new cars, securing commissions for the month. One of those salesmen was Dylan Carter, a cocky, smooth-talking man in his late 20s. Known around town for his flashy lifestyle and love for expensive cars, Dylan had earned a reputation for his brash personality and arrogance. He was the kind of guy who wore designer suits to work, boasted about his latest conquests at the bar, and looked down on anyone who didn't share his love for all things luxurious. Dylan took pride in his job. He loved the thrill of closing deals, the power of convincing someone to spend more than they had planned, and, of course, the hefty commissions that came with selling top-of-the-line cars. To him, cars weren't just vehicles, they were status symbols, and anyone who drove a cheap, beat-up car was, in his eyes, beneath him. It was a slow afternoon at Sterling Motors, and Dylan was lounging at his desk, idly scrolling through his phone. There hadn't been many customers that day, and he was starting to grow bored, when suddenly the sound of a rumbling engine caught his attention. He looked up just in time to see an old faded car pull into the lot. It was a relic from the late 90s, a boxy, rust-speckled sedan that had clearly seen better days. The paint was chipped, the tires worn, and one of the side mirrors was held on by duct tape. Dylan's lips curled into a smirk as he watched the car sputter to a stop near the entrance of the dealership. The driver's side door creaked open, and out stepped a woman in her mid-30s. She was dressed in simple, modest clothing, a plain blouse and jeans, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She looked around the lot with an expression of quiet curiosity, as if she were taking it all in. Dylan chuckled to himself. Who drives a car like that? He thought, shaking his head. This woman, whoever she was, clearly didn't belong in a place like Sterling Motors. He could tell just by looking at her that she wasn't the kind of customer who could afford one of their high-end vehicles. "Hey, guys!" Dylan called out to his fellow salesmen who were lounging nearby. "Check out the jalopy that just rolled in. I didn't know they still made cars that old." The other salesmen snickered, their eyes following the woman as she slowly walked through the lot, inspecting the newer models on display. "I wonder if she's lost," one of them joked. "Maybe she's looking for the junkyard." Dylan laughed, loud enough for the woman to hear. She glanced in his direction for a brief moment, her eyes meeting his. But instead of reacting, she simply smiled, a calm, knowing smile that didn't waver, and continued walking. Intrigued but still condescending, Dylan stood up from his desk and sauntered over to where the woman was now standing, admiring a sleek, brand-new luxury SUV. He crossed his arms, a smug grin plastered across his face. "Nice car, huh?" Dylan said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "A little different from what you're driving, isn't it?" The woman turned to him, her expression unchanged. "Yes, it's quite nice," she replied softly, her tone polite, but not overly warm. Dylan's grin widened. He had seen customers like her before, people who came in, dreamt about driving a new car, but left empty-handed when they realized they couldn't afford it. He figured she was no different. "Are you looking to trade in your, vintage vehicle?" Dylan asked, barely able to keep the amusement out of his voice. "Because I'm not sure we'd even accept something that old." The woman smiled again, this time with a hint of amusement in her eyes. "No, I'm not here to trade it in," she said simply. Dylan raised an eyebrow. "Oh? So what brings you here?" "I'm just looking around," the woman replied, "seeing what's available." Dylan chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, let me know if you're serious about buying something. But, I have to warn you, These cars aren't exactly cheap. You might want to stick to the bargain section." The woman met his gaze steadily, her smile never faltering. "I'll keep that in mind," she said before turning her attention back to the SUV. Dylan lingered for a moment, waiting for her to ask more questions or show interest in a purchase. But when she didn't, he shrugged and walked away, his amusement quickly fading as he moved on to chat with another potential customer. He had no idea that the woman in the old car was about to turn his world upside down. The next few days passed without incident, and Dylan soon forgot about the woman in the old car. Sterling Motors was buzzing with activity again, and Dylan was back to his usual routine of showing off the latest models to high-paying clients and closing deals with ease. But something strange began to happen around the dealership. Whispers started circulating among the employees that there were changes coming, big changes. There were rumors that the dealership was under new ownership, though no one seemed to know exactly who the new owner was or what their plans were. The sales staff began speculating, wondering if their jobs would be affected or if the dealership would undergo a complete overhaul. One morning, Dylan was sitting in the break room, scrolling through social media, when his colleague, Jeff, walked in with a look of excitement on his face. "Hey man, did you hear the news?" Jeff asked, plopping down in the chair across from Dylan. Dylan glanced up, uninterested. "What news?" "Sterling Motors just got bought out," Jeff said, his voice brimming with enthusiasm. "Apparently the new owner's some big-time millionaire. They're making a huge announcement later today." Dylan raised an eyebrow. "Really? Who is it?" Jeff shrugged. "No idea. But I heard they've got serious money. This place is gonna change, man. I bet they're going to bring in a whole new fleet of luxury cars. Maybe even some exotic ones." Dylan leaned back in his chair, his interest piqued. If the dealership was about to undergo a transformation, it could mean big opportunities for him. More expensive cars meant bigger commissions, and he was already imagining the bonuses he could rake in. "Well, whoever it is, I hope they know what they're doing," Dylan said, a cocky smile tugging at his lips. "This place could use an upgrade." That afternoon, the entire staff of Sterling Motors was called to the main showroom for a meeting. The rumor mill had been in full swing all day, and everyone was on edge, eager to learn who the mysterious new owner was. Dylan stood at the back of the room, arms crossed as he watched his fellow employees chat excitedly amongst themselves. He still had no idea who the new owner could be, but part of him hoped it was someone well-connected in the automotive industry, someone who could bring even more prestige to the dealership. As the minutes ticked by, the general manager, Mr. Thompson, stepped up to the front of the room, his expression one of barely contained excitement. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Thompson began, his voice echoing through the showroom, "I'm thrilled to announce that Sterling Motors has been acquired by a new owner. Someone who believes in our mission and is eager to take this dealership to the next level." The employees leaned in, their curiosity palpable. "And now," Mr. Thompson continued, "I'd like to introduce you to the new owner of Sterling Motors, Ms. Claire Bennett." Dylan's heart stopped. The name rang in his ears like a bell, and for a moment he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. His mind raced back to that day just a few days ago when he had laughed at a woman driving an old beat-up car. Could it be? No, it couldn't be. But then the crowd parted, and into the room stepped none other than the woman from that day, the same woman he had mocked for her car, the same woman he had dismissed as not worth his time. Claire Bennett. Dylan's jaw dropped as he stared at her, his mind reeling. She was dressed sharply now, in a tailored business suit, her posture confident and poised. Gone was the modest, unassuming woman he had seen before. In her place stood someone with undeniable authority and power. Claire walked to the front of the room, smiling graciously at the assembled employees. "Thank you, everyone, for the warm welcome," she said, her voice calm but commanding. I'm excited to be a part of the Sterling Motors family, and I look forward to working with all of you as we take this dealership into the future." Dylan felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He could barely process what was happening. How could he have been so wrong? The woman he had laughed at for driving an old car was now his boss. No, more than that. She owned the entire dealership. As Claire finished her introductory speech, she scanned the room, her gaze eventually landing on Dylan. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, Dylan saw the hint of a smile tug at the corner of her lips. A knowing smile that told him she remembered exactly who he was. After the meeting ended, the employees began to disperse, chatting excitedly about the future of the dealership. Dylan, however, stayed rooted to the spot, still in shock. He needed to talk to her. He needed to apologize. Gathering his courage, Dylan made his way to where Claire stood, speaking with Mr. Thompson and a few other managers. He waited until the conversation ended before stepping forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "Ms. Bennett," he began, his voice unsteady. Claire turned to him, her expression calm but unreadable. "Yes?" Dylan cleared his throat, struggling to find the right words. I don't know if you remember me, but we met a few days ago. I wasn't very polite to you." Claire raised an eyebrow, though her face remained neutral. "I remember." Dylan felt his stomach drop. "I just wanted to say I'm really sorry. I didn't know who you were, and I shouldn't have judged you based on your car. It was wrong of me." Claire regarded him for a long moment, her gaze thoughtful. Then, to Dylan's surprise, she smiled. "Thank you for your apology," she said simply. "But it's not about who I am or what I drive, Mr. Carter. It's about how we treat people, regardless of those things. You see, I've been where you are. I've worked my way up from nothing, and along the way I've learned that appearances don't tell the whole story." Dylan swallowed hard, her words hitting him like a punch to the gut. Claire continued, her tone gentle but firm. "You judged me based on what you saw, but what you didn't see was the hard work, the years of struggle, and the success that came after. It's a good lesson to learn, don't you think?" Dylan nodded, too ashamed to say much more. "Yes, it is." Claire smiled again, this time with a hint of understanding. "We all make mistakes, Mr. Carter. What matters is how we learn from them. I hope you'll remember that going forward." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Dylan standing there, humbled and speechless. In the days that followed, the atmosphere at Sterling Motors began to shift. Claire Bennett wasted no time in making changes, bringing in new policies that focused on customer service, employee development, and community outreach. She wasn't just interested in selling cars, she wanted to create a dealership that valued people over profits. As for Dylan, he couldn't help but feel a sense of shame every time he thought about how he had treated Claire that day. But instead of wallowing in regret, he decided to take her words to heart. He worked harder, treated customers with more respect, and made an effort to connect with his colleagues in a way he hadn't before. He had learned a valuable lesson, one that would stick with him for the rest of his life. It wasn't about the car you drove, the clothes you wore, or the money you had. True success came from humility, hard work, and the way you treated others. And as Dylan watched Claire Bennett transform Sterling Motors into something greater than it had ever been, he realized that sometimes the most important lessons in life come from the most unexpected people. We live in a world where people often judge others based on appearances, but as Dylan learned, those judgments can be wildly misleading. Claire Bennett may have driven an old car, but her true value went far beyond the surface. Remember, it's not the car you drive or the clothes you wear that define you. It's your heart, your work ethic, and the way you treat the people around you. After all, success isn't about what you have, it's about who you are. If you enjoyed this story, YouTube thinks you'll like these stories, so